Erik Beimfohr, live in the mansion. Welcome, my friend.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a hot minute. I used to talk to you quite frequently, which I think we'll discuss a little bit later. But it's nice. It's nice to talk to you. I'm particularly excited to discuss some things early in the off season with someone like you. I think it's a really good time for people that think like you do and are so invested in the space. Obviously, tons of dynasty stuff early off season. I find to be like super fascinating for the fantasy football landscape because we're not getting tons of news that's like actionable in terms of depth charts and all that kind of stuff. So it's a lot more, if you've been grinding this year round, you've been grinding it pre-NFL draft, right after the NFL draft. I think it's a great time for people like you and I and the folks watching this.
I'm sad May is about to end. I love May. May is fun. May is a hype month. It's all just complete nonsense. There's no news. There's Justin Jefferson may hold out, but not really. The only news of any consequence really was this foot irritation from our man Kyron Williams. So that's real, actually. And then Blake Corum already has a 3-down skill set, so I'm not sure why the coaches need to ask him to develop one. You drafted him in the 3rd round because he has one, and it was on television in prime time in the national championship game and throughout the season. So I think that's
for multiple seasons.
I mean, it was one of the more obvious things that I've ever seen that the best ball community in particular decided just to not care about. Maybe he didn't even fall a full round. Kyron Williams fell from like pick 11 to pick 21. I thought that was just some straight up wishful thinking. 11 was always wishful thinking. 21 is even more wishful thinking. 11 was actually more justifiable, but post Blake Corum, it's like, okay, now they've come out and they've said it. They've said the words, Blake Corum, 3rd round pick. They were spoken on the podium. Now there's no excuse. If you still want to draft this guy in the 2nd round, then that's on you. If you were drafting him at the 1-2 turn before there was any notion that he wasn't going to be the workhorse, then okay. Now, what are you doing? But that's May. That's one thing that we can point to and go, okay, that's actionable. And then the rest is just you doing your own research, right? Going back and combing through stats and finding, not without the help of an injury, without the help of a news blurb, without the help of anything, without the help of a preseason performance. It's on you to go and find these needles in these haystacks around fantasy football. That's why I love it so much. And it's rookie draft season. So I get to participate in like all these rookie drafts, all these dynasty startups. It's dynasty season, but it's also the best month for best ball. And so I thought closing it out with you on the show would just be incredible.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and maybe it's because I have a little bit of a warped mind. I don't enjoy as much the conversations about like this 3rd round pick versus like fantasy 3rd round pick, not NFL draft 3rd round pick. This, do you prefer whichever 3rd round wide receiver? Do you prefer George Pickens or Christian Kirk or whatever? That's all fine. And we'll, talk about that plenty over the course of the summer. I love, like you said, trying to find the needles in the haystack. I love digging into who are the backup running backs in all these situations, who are, to your Kyron point, who are the starting running backs that maybe the market is saying, this guy's the workhorse, but is he? Is he really, right? We have 3-man situations. We have 3-man backfield situations. We have 3rd wide receivers, sometimes 2nd wide receivers that we don't know who it is. The starting tight end, right? All those different situations I find to be the levers that we can pull that actually gain the most value for us in fantasy, right? Whether the top 5, 6, 7, 8 round guys, they're all good. That's why they go really highly in fantasy drafts. We all have our flavors and our preferences. But like last year in particular, quite frankly, a lot of the guys that I was higher on in earlier rounds were not awesome. were not awesome last year, but I was able to uncover Kyren Williams specifically. He was one of my highest drafted players across all of best ball, which is of course where I primarily focus. And when you're able to find that one needle in that haystack, it kind of makes up for any of your other mistakes that you made over the course of the whole summer. So that's where I really, really try to spend the majority of my time is siphoning through the anybody that's listening to this that knows me, talking more about Evan Hull than anyone should ever talk about, guys like that. We're getting Tank Bigsby news. Is Tank worth buying back after one of the most miserable rookie seasons we've ever seen, and all those kinds of situations, right? Damian Pierce versus Jawar Jordan. Like, I love those conversations, and this time of year is really good for them because you can get a huge edge if you're out in front before the news starts to roll in.
Yeah, May, we're able to just harvest our Dynasty rookie drafts, right? It's harvest season in Dynasty. We did all the work, all the hard work, scouting all these guys in February, March, April. Now we get to all the research we did on rookies, we get to benefit from it. We get to enjoy the harvest in May, and then also do the fun work for best ball as well in May. This is the best time when your focus starts to shift to season long and seasonal leagues, and you start to uncover these guys and to ramp up the best ball drafting. Certainly Best Ball Mania, Underdog's Best Ball Mania launches in May. So it's the under the radar best month for fantasy, the month of May. Now, you are the founder of Spike Week, the Roto Grinders tool that allows you to track your portfolio, your rostership across all these best ball teams, and you can continually add features, add functionality to this to make it much easier if you're a best ball player and you're a volume player, and the number of volume players in best ball is just growing at such an incredible rate. They need more better tools to be effective and to just be sane, right? Sanity tools for best ball players. So talk about Spike Week and what you're doing, what you've been doing, and then what you plan to do.
Yeah, you pretty much nailed it. What my belief is in fantasy as a whole is we all have our takes, our player takes, and our strategy takes, and all those kinds of things. And I like X player, you like Y player. I am well known to be a zero running back bro, but that doesn't mean I don't see the perks of Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson and Devon Achane and all these guys. We all have our preferences. But what I think is the most important is having the tools at your disposal to, no matter what your strategy is, no matter who your favorite players are, to be able to implement your strategy as best as possible. And, if you're just hanging out, drafting on your phone and that's all you care about, that's great. But you're probably not, even if you know who your favorite players are and your favorite ways to draft, you're probably actually not implementing them in the way that you think is as optimal, because you're just right. We all just pull up the phone and I'm on the clock. Who's at the top of the list? I draft that guy. And so what we wanted to do with Spike Week is build out a tool suite that allows people to, no matter what you like to do and how you like to draft, actually draft in the best way possible based on all of those preferences that each person has. We have two main tools that I like to tell everybody about. One is what we call our draft hacker. That is on desktop, but you can customize basically anything you want to see while you're drafting, right? If you just go on Underdog right now and you draft, it's just going to show you the guy's ADP and what team he plays for and all of that. But we know how important the playoff weeks are, the playoff schedules. Who do they play in weeks 15, 16, and 17? You don't need to memorize it because you can display it right onto your screen using this draft hacker. You can see how much you've drafted of an individual player on your screen while you are drafting, and then trickling down to things like what percentage of your teams, when you've drafted Lamar Jackson, is this player on, right? Okay, I took Lamar Jackson in the 4th round and I get to the 8th round and I'm deciding between these 3 running backs, but I've drafted this guy on 50% of my Lamar Jackson teams and this guy on 0 of my Lamar Jackson teams. Maybe I want to smooth that out a little bit. tons of stuff like that I think is really, really powerful in best ball, where I think it's a big volume game. I think in DFS, you might be able to, and this is how I play DFS. It's much more of a single entry, 3-entry max type game for some people, and I think that makes sense. I think it's very difficult to play best ball without drafting in volume. No matter your bankroll, there's contests out there for you to draft, 20, 50, 100, 500 teams. And so having something to be able to implement your strategy best when drafting a ton of teams, you're never going to remember all of them that you've drafted. And then we have kind of a portfolio analyzer that we call Draft IQ that will slice and dice those after you've drafted them. You can go in not during the draft and look at, how many 0 running back teams do I have? How many Raven stacks do I have? What do those Raven stacks look like? Who's on those Raven stacks? How much ADP value did I get on different teams? And everything, even not just the raw exposure, but drilling all the way down into your portfolio and understanding what teams you have. Because I run it, even having these tools and being as big of a best ball sicko as I am, you'll flip over the cards. Thursday night football of week 1, the contest launch, you're done with all your drafts for the summer. And you could go and look at this portfolio tool and you'll say, I have a bunch of Dak Prescott teams and I have one Dak Prescott and Zay Flowers team out of hundreds of teams. You'll run into that all the time, where even if you have a player that you like or multiple players that you like, you may not get them on the same teams as much, or you may not have as many stacks of some stack that you told yourself you really liked, because sometimes the drafts just don't fall that way. So we tried to build tools that allow people to be proactive and intentional about the portfolio that they're putting together in best ball. And it's been a game changer for me, and hopefully other people, are finding some great use in it as well.
I have some Dak Bateman stacks.
There you go.
I mean, it's one of those guys where he's on my truther list, probably top of my truther list, because
we talked about Bateman a lot over the years on some DFS shows. Yep.
Absolutely phenomenal college talent. Looks the part of today's modern sort of target commander in the NFL. Has had some devastating lower body injuries, but has finally had a healthy camp, is finally feeling like himself, looking like himself, running like himself, and we may see the real Rashod Bateman this year. And no Odell Beckham, and yes, they brought in Tez Walker, day 3 pick. Those guys rarely ever produce as rookies. Therefore, I think Rashod Bateman has to be someone that you're interested in, not necessarily just in best ball, but for the most part, you're not going to be drafting in a season-long league, right? You're going to be drafting the number 2 receiver on a team with a run-oriented quarterback, all right? One of these dynamic quarterbacks, the number 2 receiver or number 3 receiver, if you want to count Mark Andrews, typically is not someone that you need to roster. That's a guy you can always know you can pick up on the waiver wire in a traditional league. But Rashod Bateman exemplifies the type of guy that every best ball bro is on. Like they know about, they may not be drafting a lot of them, but they've done their analysis on Rashod Bateman, because this is a number 2 with some real potential to be a number 1 if things break his way somehow, some way, as opposed to a bunch of other number 2s and number 3s around the league where their ceiling isn't quite what Rashod Bateman would be.
That's maybe my, we kind of talked about it when I had to get my quota of Evan Hull mentions in per show earlier, but that is the beauty of best ball to me, is in a managed season-long league, even if Bateman comes through and is more of the player that we were expecting when he came out of Minnesota, he's still not a guy you're ever really going to feel comfortable clicking into your starting lineup, right? Like, even
maybe at some point, if there's an injury to Flowers, all these things that happen, sure, but he's not a guy you need to draft. You're not drafting
exactly.
him. You're not drafting him in your draft. High stakes, even go out to 24 round draft. You're not maybe, but we're drafting running backs. We're going to be much more likely to draft an Evan Hull or draft a Ronnie Rivers. There's so many running backs I would rather have than the third option on a team with a running quarterback. So
And
that's the difference in the strategy. Where in best ball, you're probably going to have more Bateman because best ball is more wide receiver centric and deeper typically than a traditional season long league. Where in a season long league, all else equal, your bench player is going to be running backs because week one, you want to be the guy that has that backup running back where people go to the waiver wire, they search for his name, and he's not available. He's on your team already because you stockpile like 5 running backs on your bench in the draft. The reverse is true in best ball, where there's a whole bunch of running backs that just don't get drafted in best ball every draft because that's not the focus. The focus is the receivers.
And the beauty, like I said, of best ball is, let's say Bateman does come through. You don't have to worry about the waiver wire thing, but you get to reap the rewards for the entire season. There is this compounding effect. You don't have to go, like you said, you don't have to go and pick him up week 1 on the waivers. He's on your roster already. If he's a hit, he's a hit. And if he's not, you got 18 or 20 players on your roster. It's okay. And as long as he's out there and running routes, right, we're assuming no injuries, he can still be helpful even if he's a whiff. Even if he's a whiff in best ball, these guys can still be helpful. This is a little bit not a perfect apples to apples comparison because it's a lot of times it's rookies. It's highly drafted rookies that come through in this way. But I constantly think back to a couple of different rookies that hit in that way who are not hits as NFL football players. Tyquan Thornton as a rookie was like a stone cold zero. You definitely didn't want him on your managed league team, and you were never starting him. And even late in the season when he was out there running routes, you definitely didn't want to start him because he wasn't commanding targets. But in best ball, those guys can still win you something in those key playoff weeks because they are second round picks or first round picks or third round picks in the NFL draft, and they're out there running routes because the team is incentivized to see what they have in those guys. KJ Hamler, if you recall, I imagine you were a similar KJ Hamler fan to me as a fun prospect out of Penn State. And like the guy's not going to be a good NFL football player, right? Maybe it was injuries, maybe it wasn't. But at the end of the day, he's not a winning fantasy, draft pick. But guess what? Justin Herzig probably has multiple KJ Hamler jerseys hanging in his house somewhere because he caught a long touchdown that helped him win a best ball tournament because those, like you said, those back end wide receivers with some form of prospect profile can get there for you in multiple ways, and you can reap those rewards, whether it is that compounding effect of, oh no, Bateman is still really good, and I get to use him as an 18th round pick from week 1 to week 17, or maybe he's still not that good, but guess what? He's going to be out there. And if he does happen to catch that one long touchdown, I still get to reap those rewards. I don't have to worry about starting them.
What an incredible feeling to have, 3, 2, 1, 1, 0, 0, 5, 6, 3, 2 from Tyquan Thornton. You forgot about him, right? But you happen to have this team that's, in the final week has passed all the way through to week 17 in best ball, and then he puts up 15 fantasy points and enters your lineup and helps you. I mean, what an incredible! You're like, I can't believe this. This is what a cool found money situation that is with a KJ Hamler or a Tyquan Thornton.
That's exactly what happened to Pat Kerrane, won Best Ball Mania 3 on Underdog Fantasy, and he had Tyquan Thornton on his team, and he made his lineup in week 17, the championship week, because he caught a long touchdown, and he provided absolutely zero to the team the whole season, and then just so happens to catch that long touchdown. And that is the beauty of that exact archetype of player that you're outlining, is they can win you money in multiple different ways, and best ball is really the only format where that can happen.
Now, we also, DFS also has, like you said, it's a completely different game, but also, super fun, and to have different portfolios. Like this week, I got these DFS raws. I'm super high ownership on this guy this week, and then but my overall best ball portfolio, that's the same every week. We used to do a show. We used to do a DFS show on Roto Grinders. It was a fun show. Did a Friday show with you. Do you remember that show?
Oh, of course. I think about that show quite frequently. It's exactly what we've been talking about here. Why I loved that show and why I enjoy talking to you is, DFS has been around quite a while, and I've worked in it, and you've worked in the space plenty a lot, and we're very familiar with it. It's tough to create unique content when it comes to DFS. You really have to take some different angles and be willing to really like get down in the weeds with some stuff, and be willing to be wrong, but be willing to get down in the weeds with some names that other people would not be interested in. And that's very much how I like to play the game. And I know that that was such a natural conversation, between us on that show, where we're talking about names that, I mean, they're not even getting mentioned on any show across the entire industry. And we spent 15 minutes talking about them because those are some of the edges I think that we can find, especially when you come from spaces like where we come from. So it was a ton of fun to do that show. Occasionally I'll give you I do a Sunday morning DFS show every single week on Roto Grinders. And I think that's the thing I still, I pull from, of course, just my background, but our show that we did as well, that the biggest hits I've ever had on that show that people probably still come back for are those, digging deep into those. So like I was on Puka Nakua in week 1 of DFS this past season. Do you remember the Jake Bobo game of this year? Jake Bobo had one big game for Seattle this particular season. Like pulling those names, right? Getting the 0.1% owned min price wide receiver who has a huge game. There's really nothing quite like that.
We were just going hard at these 3.2K receivers on DraftKings.
Nobody talked about Khalif Raymond. We
talked about Khalif Raymond so much. It was unbelievable. That was, dude, you said it, man. I was like Khalif Raymond. That was so many weeks we were like, God, man, this feels like a Khalif Raymond week. Dude, you're taking me back to memory lane with that. That was incredible. Unfortunately, I am not able to do as much content as I'm. Hey, I still do at least, one show a week, sometimes 3. We had a couple weeks there recently where I did Decision Point, Anasonic Truth, and a Minded Mansion, and I take a lot of pride in being able to still host shows, put out these, heavily researched show sheets. And when we get criticism of like, oh, you guys aren't you're really putting the effort in with the Sonic Truth, you're just doing a mock draft again. And we follow it up with one of our best shows ever was like just fully researched topic, bang, 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 bang. And I'm like, eat it, everybody, still got it. Right. So how many best ball teams do you plan to draft this year?
Oh, that is such a good question. So I drafted about 800 last year. Wow. I am drafting on 3 different sites: Underdog, of course, DraftKings, and Drafters. And so I like to spread. So I mentioned that I think it's a volume game. So I am trying to get about as many teams drafted as really physically possible. The biggest issue for me is that not a slow draft guy. Struggle with the slow draft element of things. Plus, I do believe if you're have some edges in this game, the edges can extrapolate in a fast draft where your opponents are put on the clock and have to make decisions. They're more apt to screw up that pick. You can sometimes pit your opponents against themselves when they're on the clock. Like, oh, I bet you shouldn't take this falling quarterback. You should let him come back to me. Are you going to screw up your team to take that falling guy? In the fast drafts, I find that to be just a little bit more valuable. So I try to do a ton of those.
The what? The fast what?
Oh yeah, yeah, that was not planned.
Oh,
put it on a tee, and that was not planned. That was not planned at
all.
No,
it was not. And we'll just leave it there. Continue what you were saying. We'll just leave it at that. Continue what you were saying.
I am what we would call a fast draft bro, but apparently in multiple ways. I'm learning here on this show. Like I said, I believe it's a volume game. I want to get it. My goal is more than 1,000 this year. It's difficult because at the end of the day, we do have to balance our lives, like 45 minutes a pop. 1,000 of them, you do the math, that's a lot. I do, what we would call multi-table quite frequently, and the Spike Week tools are what help me do that. I don't think I would be able to do it if I didn't build the tool.
Of course not.
Not to be a salesman, but with the Spike Week thing is it's a couple best ball players who play this like really, really serious and draft thousands of teams over the year. And we built the stuff that we want to use. It wasn't like, us just having an idea that somebody might be interested in this. It was like, no, I need this for my drafts. And so
you're eating at your own restaurant, man.
Exactly. I am the Italian chef who eats a lot of pizza and pasta for sure. And especially as I get older, I'm finding, but somewhere in that 1,000 range, I think. But we're also getting, the industry's just blowing up, man. It's crazy. There's so many tournaments out there, and so many sites, and so many new and fun formats. I mentioned Drafters is really nice because it is not the playoff format that Underdog and DraftKings are. So if you want to play a game where it's like, no, I draft this team and I just need to score the most points over the whole season, it's a nice, refreshing change from the playoff format. And then places like Underdog are launching new formats as well. They have one that I'm really going to dive into this year called the Eliminator, which is a ton of fun. Basically don't finish at the bottom every single week and navigate your way all the way to week 17 without finishing at the bottom of your group each week is a really fun format. So there's so many different games, and I think we're in the golden age kind of, this is like early days of DFS, and I regret not playing more when it was the early days of DFS. So I'm trying to play about as much as I can, and, while still keeping my sanity.
I've heard from some people that, where this is sort of, we're post fantasy, right? And it's so funny to think, and I have a completely different perspective on it, where I'm like, well, wait a second. What timeline are you looking at? Because, fantasy, became like an online managed hobby around 2000, right? ESPN, Yahoo developed web-based apps to manage your fantasy team. And now we're close to 25 years in that it's been, something that you can, a game that you can play electronically. But then 10 years later, boom, DFS comes out. 10 years later after that, boom, a best ball, beyond like the MFL 10s comes out and is popularized by the underdogs. And to me, we're scratching the surface, right? Where someone else might say, well, fantasy's been pretty much pretty overdone at this point. And I'm like, wait, what? Do you realize how many different formats that are possible that I've thought of just in the shower that haven't even been created yet? Oh man, just wait 10 years from now, there's going to be another format that's going to be like best ball. That is what everybody's talking about and everybody's streaming. Like, fantasy isn't going anywhere. In fact, in the last couple of years, even though sports betting has become popularized to a much greater extent, it's just rapidly getting, market penetration, and more states are passing laws to allow it and regulate it. The rate of growth of fantasy gamers has gone up the last couple of years. It has not gone down. It has not plateaued. It has actually, the rate of increase has gone up. So that's fascinating, but it makes sense. It's just people just want more sweat, more games around games, right? It's and there's more network effects. There's more casual people that are getting involved with fantasy than ever before. There's more people that are, going to college, and college kids are I hear so many people like, oh, my kid went to college and, he's now got, 3 fantasy teams. And like, I heard about fantasy football my senior year of college. Right. So it's never been more healthy right now. The fantasy sports industry's never been in a better spot. Look at this Underdog Pomeranian tournament for Exhibit A. Okay. That thing filled in just a couple days. And how many teams were able to sneak into that one?
I think I only got like 6 or 7 in there because it came out right before a weekend.
Right.
And I was like, I would like to get, I don't know, maybe 20 or something. I knew I wasn't going to get all the way up to the 50 or whatever it was because all these sickos out there, like you said, close these it
They just
feels
closed it
so
down, bro.
unbelievably quickly. But that's exactly to everything that you just outlined. Like if someone were to say, oh yeah, fantasy is dying. I mean, certainly not dying, but leveling off. It's certainly possible that games that have been around for a very long time are leveling off. But that doesn't mean that there aren't these new games. And I'm not saying the Pomeranian is a new game, but it's a great indicator of, well, there is still this other form that has tons of interest that we can launch a fantasy football tournament in mid to late May. And, let's just call it, I'm just going to rough math it, 100,000 people will come in and draft it in 3 days and fill it. Like that's absolutely insane. So it's absolutely a blossoming space. And I think, shout out to Underdog and all those folks to be putting out those tournaments where it's accessible for everybody, right? That's what I love about some of those games is come in, get your $2. Drafters has a $2 best ball tournament with, I believe, $25,000 to first place.
Why not?
Like the amount of money you can win for $2, $3, $5, $4, whatever, is absolutely incredible. And I think that's the great indicator, even more so than the Best Ball Manias and the DraftKings Millionaire Makers. The fact that we can fill like tens to hundreds of these low dollar tournaments with hundreds of thousands of dollars up for the total prizes just tells you everything you need to know about the space right now.
What is the difference if you were drafting on Underdog versus a Drafters versus a DraftKings? Because I know people draft at different volumes on different platforms and have various preferences for their platforms. What do you think is the big difference between those platforms?
I'm gonna start with DraftKings because it's the one that stands out the most from the other two, which is funny because Drafters has the most unique scoring format, not in how they accumulate points, but how you win the tournament. But DraftKings is we kind of like to call it the Wild West of the best ball space, right? So if you think about it, DraftKings is this company that's been around for a long time. And they came from, the DFS world. So they have this huge user base, millions and millions of users. And then they launched this best ball product on top of it. They run some promos, they shoot you an email or a push alert or whatever. And you're like, oh, they're going to give me some free stuff to play best ball. Sounds good. So they got millions of these casual people coming in, and they don't subscribe to a lot of the same, strategies or thoughts that you and I have, or the people listening to this have, or, the people that watch my stuff have. It's more of a casual user base. You get people reaching for guys. They love their quarterbacks on DraftKings and things like that sharper drafters maybe can take advantage of, but it does create a level of variance in your drafts on DraftKings that's wild. Sometimes a guy goes 2 rounds ahead of his ADP, and then the next draft you're in, he goes 3 rounds after his ADP. It's really all over the place. But then they use their standard DFS scoring, meaning it's full point PPR with yardage bonuses, right? If you get 100 yards rushing, 100 yards receiving, or 300 yards passing, you get an extra 3 points, just like in their DFS game. So that's not like a drastic difference, but there's some small things around the edges that, for example, I didn't know this.
That leads to spikier spike weeks.
Exactly. The big games become even bigger. You separate even more because of their scoring, but you also get little nuances like 300-yard bonus is not that big of a deal, but it can level the playing field with a pocket passer that is not really possible on Underdog, especially. Derek Carr tied for the league lead in 300-yard passing games last year. He's not, going to do what Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen can do, certainly with his legs and from a huge spike game perspective. But, if he's getting 9 300-yard games, that's a lot of extra points. And that's a lot of extra useful games that he can provide to you for cheaper. So guys like that can be a little more valuable on DraftKings. On Drafters, I actually find it to be the toughest drafting environment because if you're, it's the smallest of the sites. And if you're over there and you're grinding it out on Drafters, you're probably pretty serious about this game, right? You didn't just find Drafters, in a Google search or a commercial. You sought them out. So it's the toughest drafting environment. And then just the big difference, they are full PPR, but every week counts, right? Week 1 counts just as much as week 17, and week 6 counts. Just every single week matters. And so there's just some little different strategies. I think people can oftentimes worry too much about the fact that week 1 matters as much, when we still want to target the big hits and not worry so much about how they score their points in terms of timing. But there are some big differences in like trying to figure out how to layer in your points. And then Underdog, half PPR, no bonuses, everything is playoff centric. I think that there's actually some big edges to be had just in everybody still comes from the season long space that plays, right? Like you found out about best ball probably because you came from season long fantasy, and the market still hasn't figured out just how different the game is and just how impactful the playoffs and scoring points late season. Like if you have a dream, like I just want to sneak into the playoffs. Like I don't really, you don't get extra money if you win your regular season by 500 points. You would almost rather just sneak in and have a team that's ascending in the playoffs on Underdog, even more so than the other sites. So some pretty distinct differences between the three.
What about this year, week 17 is so huge. Is there an under the radar week 17 game that you're circling?
So I'm trying not to get out over my skis, like predicting what the best games are going to be in week 17, because I think we find so frequently how wrong we are about that. Like it's May. Those games don't happen till Christmas. It's like, I don't know what I'm going to eat for lunch tomorrow. Nonetheless, do I know who's the best defense, in week 17. I do find sometimes that like at the very, the absolute best teams and the absolute worst teams, generally like from a defensive side of things, there can be a little bit of predictability in that. One that stands out, two, I'll give you two more so just defensive takes that stand out to me. And they happen to be in some interesting week 17 matchups. The Rams defense to me looks set to be quite putrid. I think they have been holding on to, of course, Aaron Donald is no longer there and he's the linchpin of that whole deal on that defensive side, but they've been holding on to a very stars and Scrubsian approach across their whole roster, but definitely on defense, right? Give me Jalen Ramsey, give me Aaron Donald, and I'm going to fill in the gaps around two superstars. Ramsey, take away one side of the field. Aaron Donald, get triple teamed and let everybody else kind of eat around that. When you lose that and you don't replace it with that level of superstar, I think it's going to be really tough for the Rams to be even above average on defense. They are at home. LA, I think, is a fine place to play from a weather. And they get the Cardinals, who I'm pretty bullish on this year with the addition of Marvin Harrison and a healthy Kyler Murray, the emergence of Trey McBride. I think that the Cardinals look really appealing, so that one looks good. And then a similar defensive situation to me is the Dolphins. They took a very similar approach to like what the Rams did with their defense. Speaking of Jalen Ramsey, right? But they just like, let's pay whatever we got to pay for a bunch of veteran studs on defense. And they're having to reap what they sowed with that. And they don't have much talent left over. They were in salary cap hell, and they're not going to not pay Tyreek Hills and Tuas and all that. They decided to go all in on offense, which is great for scoring. I think when we get to the DFS season, you're going to be playing a lot of Dolphins and a lot of Dolphins opponents because we know the Dolphins can score, and I don't think they're going to stop absolutely anybody. And they play, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting about Cleveland, who is not an offense I'm super duper excited about, but we saw what Amari Cooper can do in any single individual week last year. We saw the emergence of David Njoku, and we know that they can run the football. And so I think those two games were two that stood out to me. Maybe most people look at high-powered offense versus high-powered offense, like say the Ravens and the Texans. I like to look at these teams that, like, when you look at this defense, there's just absolutely no possible way they could be good on defense. And that's how I view it a little bit differently.
Well, the case for ignoring defense is that injuries could ravage any given defense.
Yep.
Right. So yes, imagine the Rams without Donald and Ramsey just based on injuries. And so, like, with Dallas and Philadelphia, imagine if Dallas and Philadelphia lose a couple star defenders, then that game is going to be a bonanza.
Yeah, no Micah Parsons, and the Cowboys defense is not even anything close to what we were expecting it to
Exactly. We're talking about, just one injury to one defender in Micah Parsons, and then all of a sudden that becomes a shootout of epic proportion. So that's the case for that. But with Arizona in particular, just another brick in the wall for why you need to be, piling into Arizona this year. That one's, I think, clear. And they just also happen to have a rookie running back with day 2 capital and an incredible speed score who's behind a 30-year-old. Hey, right? But continue just to put Jonathan Brooks in a tier by himself. Please continue to do that. By all means, put Brooks in a tier by himself and let me have Trey Benson at value. Please continue to do that. Also, if a team does not have a great defense, and we know the Rams they can't have a great defense because they didn't have any draft picks the last 5 years. Okay, there's only so many impact defenders you can find in the 5th round. They've done a great job of it.
Yep.
But come on, man, the cupboard has been bare in the NFL draft. They've been it's been a total sort of getting by with just flash paper and nickel and dime store assets, and it's not sustainable. You get a couple injuries, then it is the worst defense in the league. If it's not the worst defense in the league in week 1, it could easily be the worst defense in the league by week 4. But that means the team has to score a lot of points, right? And there's going to have to be a lot of touchdowns. There's going to be a lot of shootouts. There's going to be a lot of garbage time. And yes, Puka and Cooper Kupp are there, and I think they're pretty efficient ADPs. But the ADP that's starting to become more efficient, but there's still room, is Blake Corum. He is going to be in an offense that is have to score a lot of points, and some of those points are going to be a plunge in from the 1 yard line where Puka stepped out just before the pylon. That's going to happen again and again and again. So where is a lot of the value in May? It's in these rookies where it takes time. Oftentimes with a lot of fantasy gamers, they have to see it. Like, they have to see more buzz from the beat reporters, and there's fewer beat reporters around now because there's fewer local newspapers, and they have to see the preseason. So it's not quite enough for people to get fully hyped on a Trey Benson or on a Blake Corum until they see a little bit more, and that's where we can come in and look at the schedule and think about the scenario that's going to play out throughout the course of the season with the Rams and be like, man, Blake Corum's got some ridiculous upside here. Especially when you consider how bad their defense could be. And then in best ball, you got to ask, well, who is the number 3 receiver in Los Angeles? That's the type of question that we love to ask. Who the hell is this guy? He is going to matter, right? I mean, Demarcus Robinson, Tutu Atwell, Jordan Whittington, Tyler Johnson. These are guys that are down the depth chart. Like, Tutu Atwell is going to have weeks, dude. He is going to have weeks. He's fast. He's a great football player. He's the greatest high school football player in the history of football.
His
one of the
college,
biggest one of the biggest high school programs, one of the most famous high school and prolific high school programs in Miami. That's where he came from. But he's 5'9", 155. But the guy is seriously quick, and he has seriously great football skills, and he will give you spike weeks.
He was such a funny one for me because I play a lot of college football, DFS. I'm a big college. Honestly, if you said, gun to your head, what do you prefer to watch? It's the college sports over the professional sports. But of course, our money gets invested in the professional sports. So that's where we spend all of our time. But if anybody watched college football or played college football DFS, Tutu was like the most absurd college football player you've ever seen. I never seen a guy, especially that size, of course, with like a 40% target share and basically if they move the ball, I believe Malik Cunningham took over at quarterback still while Tutu was there, but I could be mistaken about that. But it was basically like, we'll run it some and then throw it to Tutu. And like that was, and they were good. They were really good.
Oh, 31%
on
college target share for Tutu Atwell.
Right, over his career, over his entire career. There were games where they would complete 15 balls and he caught 10 of them, for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. I never seen somebody, especially that size, dominate the college game. And we're not talking about, he didn't come from Eastern Washington. He didn't come from North Dakota. He was in the ACC. He was doing this in the ACC, which isn't the world's best. It's not the SEC, but it's not a low major or a D2, type situation. And so I still keep a candle on for him as a role player in the NFL. And I'm just interested in the Rams offense. My favorite thing about the Rams, and this was a huge hit last year and has been historically, is you just know where the ball's going. And that's difficult. We did DFS shows. Sometimes you're like, is this a Khalif? Is this a Khalif Raymond week? Is this a Jake Bobo week? Because these offenses spread it around. That's not how Sean McVay operates. He keeps the same players on the field. 95% of snaps. That's what they do. They keep their 3 wide receivers out there. So that's the hindrance to Tutu, is he can't block because he's too little. So that's why Demarcus Robinson steals so many snaps. But he'll be utilized in some form of a package because he provides something to an NFL team. And I was just going to add on the Blake Corum thing. You know how this goes in the offseason. We'll get the content of who's this year's Kyren Williams and who's this year's, we just look at last year and we say, okay, how can we find that guy again? The answer is they don't exist in the same framework. But who's this year's Kyren Williams? It's probably just Kyren Williams backup. And that's Blake. They drafted the guy in the 3rd round. Kyren has been unable to stay healthy, and he's already not healthy. And as much as I love Kyren as a football player, and shout out to him for helping us win a bunch of money last year, if he's not healthy, it's just Blake. It's the guy who steps into the Kyren Williams role, who was drafted in the 3rd round.
Give us a few, though. Give us a few more. Guys that are late, guys that are going, because Corum's getting steamed up. Obviously, Jesus Christ, of course, a month later. But guys that are, round 15, 16, 17 in these best ball drafts that also are candidates to be that guy.
Yeah. I won't keep belaboring the Evan Hull point, but I think the market's just wrong about the value of a second back in Indy. I don't think Jonathan, the greater conversation about this is I think the market's generally just wrong about how running back works in the NFL nowadays. It gets viewed very much in like a Madden-esque way where like this guy is we try to do this like very binary thing where you say this guy's the starter and this guy's the backup, or this guy's the goal line back and this guy's the 3rd down back. And sometimes that is true, that second part. But generally speaking, even other than Christian McCaffrey and like Saquon last year, and a little bit of Kyren, 80% of backfields are some form of a committee. Now there's probably a lead and a secondary player, but every backfield plays multiple players. And we view it in fantasy, especially, in the best ball landscape where I come from, in a very starter versus backup way. And I don't think that it really ever plays out that way over the course of the season in most backfields. And so the guys like Evan Hull, who were prolific pass catchers in college, are big-bodied, really good athletes, are going to have a role for the Colts. Like he's going to play. He's going to play. Now, is Jonathan Taylor the back you want, right? I'm not comparing the two. But can those guys have a role week 1? Absolutely. And so they can steal some of that week 1. And if you ever lose Jonathan Taylor for a stretch, he's going to emerge into the majority of that role. Not all of it, right? Someone like a Trey Sermon or a Tyler Goodson will get work, but the emergence becomes this guy was already a part of our team and a part of our offense as Kyren was. And then whether Cam Akers gets banished because Kyron's better than him or the guy gets hurt, you step into a greater role. That's why I like guys with that full every down skill set, that pass catching skill set like Evan Hull has, to be not the James White pass catching skill set, right? The ability to be an every down player and operate on passing downs. A guy who keeps jumping out to me in this regard is Kendre Miller.
Yes.
A sophomore type player who, did disappointed in terms of his output last season, but it was mostly injury related. He missed basically the whole summer with his injury. And I think he re-aggravated. You can correct me if I'm misremembering, but he got hurt in their final game at TCU. He was dominating in the college football playoff, by the way, for TCU. Got hurt, really missed the whole offseason. They did bring in Jamal Williams. And so they just kind of rode Jamal Williams and Alvin Kamara. But now Alvin Kamara another year older, Jamal Williams another year older. Kendre was a legit good prospect and a 3rd round pick who was running with the ones just recently in OTAs. Kamara was like on vacation. They have OTAs and Kamara was just like, I'm taking the family to like Africa for a safari or whatever. I'll see you guys in a couple months. But Kendre's the one benefiting from that. We could see Kamara's role lessened. We could see Jamal Williams just not be a thing anymore. And there's one beneficiary, and it's Kendre Miller. I think he could be the guy that Kamara's not going anywhere, like as a receiver or whatever. But if you see somebody who without an injury just emerges into like a huge, huge role for fantasy and real life, I think Kendre tops that list for me at running back.
And in Chicago, it may not be an injury. It may be something else where the coaches just decide, we're sick of this guy. This DeAndre Swift has bounced around. No one wants him for a reason. And Roshan Johnson's reliable. Roshan Johnson caught more passes last year than anyone expected. Basically, what you're saying is everyone we liked last year at running back that didn't fire, draft him again.
Yep.
Right? Roshan, Evan Hull, Kendre, just, run it back. Right? Line it up again. That's all you do. That's all you need to do. Evan Hull, 88 catches his final 2 seasons at Northwestern. Speed score, 80th percentile. Burst score, 80th percentile. Agility score, 80th percentile. Like, this is Aaron Jones.
At 225 or something. He's like 225. He's
at least 210. He might have put on weight. I don't know. But he is not small. Okay, I saw him at the Senior Bowl. Definitely not small. And so that's the strategy in the double-digit rounds in best ball is take the guys we loved last year. Every rookie will tell you that the NFL is challenging, right? Even the ones that perform at a high level will say this was harder than I thought. This was very challenging, and it's a completely different world when you step back on the practice field for year 2. Just keep that in mind, especially with these second-year running backs.
I just want to hammer that home again because when people view who is this year's Kyron Williams, they're often just saying who's a late round running back who's going to like emerge to be awesome, right? But what I really think it is this is what Kyron Williams was. Second year back. He also missed time due to injury, similar to Kendre. I loved Kyron as a prospect. Then, of course, we got the athletic testing, which didn't make it look very good. But I was like, you can go search Erik Beimfohr Kyron or whatever, and you can see me waxing poetic in Twitter threads, right, about posting his videos. And, I'm obsessed with the little subtle nuances of running backs in terms of pass protection, basically being trusted to do the things that an NFL team, like, why does Samaje Perine still have a job? Why does Ezekiel Elliott still have a job in the NFL? It's because teams trust them to do those things, not get their quarterback killed, right? Understand pass protections, leak out when you need to leak out, catch the ball in the flat when you need to do it, right? It's not so much about the Ronald Joneses of the world can do on a 98-yard touchdown. It doesn't really matter in terms of how you get on the field in the NFL. It's these little things, and that extra year, as you outlined, can be the difference between being trusted by your team in pass protection, in the no huddle, in the 2-minute, and all that kind of stuff. That's what we saw with Kyron. I think that's what we could see with some of these other guys.
But there are going to be some rookies that go nuclear.
Yep.
Okay, so give us like 3 rookies you like at cost right now.
So Trey Benson is my favorite. You outlined that one already. I love Arizona. I love.
How is this possible? Trey Benson, like
he's going after pick 100. In a good offense with a mobile quarterback. We know mobile quarterbacks are good for rushing production, but Kyler's the rare mobile quarterback who also throws to his running backs. Right, Kyler's mobile, and he's not Anthony Richardson mobile. He's like shifty, really, really fast mobile. So I love Trey Benson. I love when the roadblock is an old, injury-prone, unexplosive running back. I love when that's the roadblock because he's going to play. Like Trey Benson's going to play regardless, and he could just banish James Conner to the bench just through his play. They could just want to see what they have in the rookie down the stretch, again, to the best ball, like emerging down the playoffs. You can get, because the coaches are incentivized to see what they have in Trey Benson. And of course, James Conner could just get hurt. You have all these paths to just like a nuclear season. And that's hard to find. A lot of the times you just need, right, Christian McCaffrey needs to get hurt for Eli Mitchell to do something, or for whoever the backup is now. A lot of the times you need an injury. I love the guys that don't necessarily need that injury. I'm going to cheat now and give you another Louisville guy who I'm targeting. This kind of is a double parter. I know you had a question about undrafted players going, in the 18, you can draft in the last round of your drafts. If there's a running back who I could not really possibly be more out on, it would be Dameon Pierce. And yet everyone is anointing Dameon Pierce as the backup in Houston, even though all they did was show us like, no, we don't like this guy. He lost his job to Devin Singletary. They could have given him the job after Devin Singletary left this year, and they brought in Joe Mixon. And then they drafted Jawar Jordan, who I think is a much better fit in their zone scheme. I think that's the Dameon Pierce issue. I don't think he can, play in a patience type, system that requires, one cut zone running scheme. I don't think that's Dameon Pierce. So I'm mixing in someone like a Jawar Jordan as like a super deep rookie flyer in the last rounds in an ambiguous situation behind, honestly, like what's the difference between Joe Mixon and James Conner, right? And we know the Texans are going to be awesome on offense. So I want the backup there, and I like making the bet on Jawar instead of Dameon Pierce.
Texans, man.
That's a good offense. That's a pretty good offense.
Pretty sexy. Do you have any thoughts or projections on the target distribution? Because that is a very, polarizing topic.
So this is one of my, I'm glad you asked this. This isn't a projection, but this is one of my favorite stories so far of the offseason. And I started writing an article I call 5 Things every single week, where just like things I see here, it could be a news blurb, it could be like a stat I saw when I was researching or whatever this week. And one of them I put in 5 Things this week was, CJ Stroud and Micah Parsons have a podcast, right? It's actually really, really interesting to see those two guys just kind of talk ball. Micah Parsons is a crazy person. But
what's it called?
Oh my God. I forget what it's called.
I want to subscribe to that.
Yes, but check it out. Just obviously for the folks, Google. It's by Bleacher Report. I know that's why I don't remember what
you can go. Everyone uses a thing called Google, so we'll go ahead and Google it, everybody.
Yes, but I highly recommend. And they did a little segment where CJ Stroud had to put together his best 11 NFL players out of the current NFL active players, like real positions, right? So it had to fill out an offensive line, running backs, wide receivers, and all that kind of stuff. And Micah Parsons was going to pick his top 11 on defense. And then they're going to do the, who would win more, viewers can vote, and all that kind of stuff. So CJ Stroud goes through, he starts naming off his offense, right? Of course, he's at quarterback. He goes down the wide receivers and he says, Devontae Adams at X.
Oh, I know. Hold on. Okay. Go ahead.
Jamar Chase is playing his F. And you know who's in the slot at H? Tank Dell. He could pick any wide receiver in the entire NFL, right? Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb. He could pick any of these guys. Tyreek Hill. He chose Tank Dell to be hit on his best 11 on offense, obviously out of the slot, but still, I'm not saying Tank Dell should go ahead necessarily of all three of them, but what I am saying is that I think the market is very overconfident that it goes Nico, Diggs, big gap, Tank Dell, which is what ADP is telling you. Nico goes at the end of the second round. Tank Dell goes Steph Diggs goes at the beginning of the third round, and you can get Tank easily in the fourth round of like most of these drafts. Certainly end of the third, and I rank them. I basically put Nico and Tank like right next to each other, and then Diggs in terms of how I would prioritize like that projection. But to me, Tank might be, in terms of the first 5 or 6 rounds of drafts, Tank might be the biggest screaming value I think that exists, because he might just be the best wide receiver on the best offense in the NFL.
If he's not the best, he's the second best.
Agreed.
Right? It's not Nico Collins. That is the most backwards ADP of 3 players on the same team you could possibly imagine. Nico Collins was, very good last year and very bad for 2 years before that.
Yeah.
And Noah Brown in a similar role was very good as well. And so if you were going to say system versus player in the history of football, one of the easiest system versus player debates I've seen is Nico Collins. It's a lot more system than it was player, where Tank Dell did what people thought was impossible, which was to win on the outside at 5'2", 120 pounds. He did it. Mm-hmm. He didn't play as much slot as we thought he would. It was actually incredible what he did. And now I think that John Mechie is also going to get on the field this year, right? I think that he's interesting, but I also think there's going to be injuries. In no team, their top 3 receivers stay healthy the entire season. So who's going to be the Noah Brown? And that might actually be John Mechie. But the guy that you want at cost clearly is Tank Dell. I'm mystified. I've been mystified. And it's so funny how they have very similar ADPs now. The Kyren Williams ADP, let's say a week ago, was similar to the Nico Collins ADP. And it's like, man, you're making it real easy to pick players here, because there's 2 players I'm just scratching off the board. Now, you can't scratch off Nico like you can scratch off Kyren, right? Because Nico's on a team where he can beat you. If you're wrong, then he's the number 1 on one of the best offenses. So you got to get some. You're not going to, you're going to basically, you can put a Sharpie on Kyren Williams, and then you can put like a highlighter, a gray highlighter on Nico Collins, where you're just overweight on Nico, and then you can just be even weight on Stephon Diggs, and just make sure you have plenty of weight on those receivers. And that, to me, is just one of the more straightforward tactics this year in best ball. For sure. Now, there's another team where there's 3 receivers and yet also a 4th, and there's a big debate. Who's the number 1? Who's the number 2? No one knows. Very ambiguous, and that's Green Bay. So you hear that Christian Watson's going to a special lab to fix his stride, because his stride is contributing to these hamstring injuries. This is new to me, right? I've heard a lot of things with kinesthetics and the human anatomy. This one's new, and I'm here for it. Great technology, awesome, cool. In Green Bay, how are you decoding this target distribution?
So the first thing on Christian Watson, it's generally a red flag, I think, when in your 3rd season of the NFL and I'm drafting you in the top 80 or 90 picks of a fantasy football draft, if you have to relearn how to run,
right?
That strikes me as like a fairly significant red flag, because you couldn't. It wasn't like you had to relearn how to run to like prolong your career, and I guess it is kind of prolonging his career, but like it wasn't like this is gonna make you a better player. This is like, no, like you pull your hamstring every 15 minutes because you don't know how to run, right? I believe they said whichever hamstring was not getting injured was 20% like stronger or bigger or whatever than the other. That is a ginormous difference. that is a gargantuan difference in your legs, right? I don't even really know how that happens. It'll happen in your right. Watch tennis players, their main arm will be, Nadal looks like the Hulk in his main arm, and the other one looks like me. But that I'm not trying to like overvalue one little data point like that. But also that feels fairly significant to me. Like he was already an injury concern, and now he has to like really change the way in which he operates. And I wasn't sold that he was, even a top 2 wide receiver on this team beforehand. This feels very similar to me to the Texans conversation we just had, except there's a little more depth even that I would be interested in. But where I'm not saying the market has it wrong, but Jayden Reed feels not in the same way, like the system thing, like you were mentioning with Nico Collins, but we've just anointed the guy who, Jesus Christ, look at that. That's Christian Watson's legs. Are
you serious? Look at this.
I mean, that is, then the right arm is big, but the left arm, like seriously, he looks like Jax or something like that from Mortal Kombat. But the market said, this is why they put Nico so high, right? Tank's out down the stretch. The Texans are popping and Nico's having big games every single week because he's the best remaining wide receiver left. Christian Watson's injured and Romeo Doubs is just kind of Romeo Doubs. And so, of course, down the stretch, Jayden Reed, right? Because he's a talented football player. He's also really their only skill set in that baby Debo type skill set that they're using him in, right? Just get him the ball, reverses, get the ball in his hands because he's really explosive with the ball. So he pops off down the stretch, and the market says, "All right, that's the guy," right? He was a rookie. He was really good as a rookie. He came on strong down the stretch. We're putting him the highest amongst the Packers. I think at cost, the Packers receiver that I absolutely want to bet on the most is Dontavian Wicks. He, to me, has the profile of a guy who, if we look back next year and we're taking Dontavian Wicks in the 3rd round, I would not be surprised because he's more of the prototypical NFL kind of alpha target dominating wide receiver. And he takes a step forward into that role, whereas Christian Watson is kind of this, explosion athlete, big play threat. Jayden Reed serves a really strong. He's a good player, right? The baby Debo thing, I think, is a really valuable asset. I don't know that Jayden Reed can ever emerge to the super elite levels of just kind of the things you do have to do, right? Tank did it. To your point, he was able to do it at that size. It's still a very rare thing to do. To do that at a smaller size, whereas Wicks, I think, can really run that full route tree down the stretch. It might have been Matt Harmon. I'm going to screw up who tweeted it, but a lot of their base concepts by the end of the season, it flipped from Dobbs and Watson running the first read, the play was designed for you route on a lot of these Packers concepts. It flipped from those guys to Wicks down the stretch, and actually a sprinkle of Bo Melton, by the way. It flipped to those guys down the stretch. And so it didn't show up as much as Reed did in the box scores, but I think we could see Wicks show up in the box scores this year and kind of take over as the outside guy that really emerges in this group, with one guy not really being able to run, Romeo Doubs just kind of being, it's a system level thing, right? Like he could be their Nico Collins and I think put up some fantasy points. But if there's a superstar amongst these guys, I think it's Dontavian Wicks.
So here's my dilemma. Okay. I was at the Senior Bowl and
I didn't love him as a prospect, by the way.
Jayden Reed was completely and utterly dominant. He was on a different team than Tank Dell. It was like the team with Dell and the team with Jayden Reed, and Wicks was Jayden Reed's caddy. That was pretty much like the relationship. Now, Puka Nacua was also there, but he left after one day, so we didn't see enough of him. Jayden Reed is 5'11", 190, best comparable to Stephon Diggs. I still think that at cost, where he is like, 5th round on Underdog, very draftable.
I draft him too. It feels like the Texans where I want him. Yeah. It's not that I don't want him. Yep.
You can just avoid Watson and Dobbs. That's the thing, right? It's very similar with Bo Melton to John Mechie, right?
Yeah,
Where
I like that too.
this guy's going to be in among the 5 receivers. He's going to get playing time. And when you look at Bo Melton, his profile is really impressive. Like, he's an upper percentile athlete. He was dominant at Rutgers. Like, he's what we want. And then all of a sudden he gets on the field and he's producing, but like, it took time. He was a 7th round pick, but then he wasn't a 7th round pick like Dontavian Wicks was a day 3 pick. He was a 7th round pick for Seattle.
Right.
So then he has to start over with Green Bay. So of course Wicks is going to have the edge on him, but it's very possible we're looking up and just actually, you know what? It's not just, it is going to happen. Okay, so this is going to happen. This is a prediction I am making that there will be 3 receiver sets in the second half that are Reed, Melton, and Wicks, with Wicks at X, and then Melton and Reed are playing Y and Z, and it's actually their best wide receiver configuration because all 4 of those guys are straight up better than Romeo Dobbs. He's not good. And I don't trust Christian Watson in this one case. I think that he's one of the more injury-prone wide receivers out there. He's shown it just in the rate of injury, but also now that we have this anecdotal evidence about his legs and his inability to run right. So, it's one of those where, like, sometimes you just say yes. When people ask you, do you want something free? You say yes. When people give you information, you just listen. Like, and instead of finding ways to debunk it, you can just believe it, right? You can just believe that this guy has a fundamental flaw. And, so I think that Watson is actually more similar to Nico Collins in that you can go back in their big breakout season and find 4 or 5 weeks where they were great. And then a bunch of weeks going back through time where they just weren't, where, there was 1 month where Christian Watson, where everything that you think about, Christian Watson's ADP is based on 1 month, right?
With Rodgers.
So it's a partial season sample fueling a guy that I don't trust. So I don't trust Nico Collins. I don't trust Christian Watson, and it's in that case you're like, well, do you like anybody else? Because you could either be underweight on this offense, or you can pivot to someone else on the team. It just so happens that I really like Wicks and I fucking love Bo Melton. And I respect the hell out of Jaden Reed. So I'm like, well, this is easy. This is the team to get, ADP leverage in best ball. You can't draw it up. You couldn't draw up a better team than the Packers.
Nope. I totally agree. It's very rare where an offense emerges with a bunch of young talent, a young quarterback who we're, varying levels of excited about, but certainly not unexcited about what Jordan Love showed us last year. And the market has made a really, really strong, has shown conviction in, no, this is the order. I'm really confident in this. And it could, it's not inconceivable that it literally flips, like completely and utterly flips. It's very rare for that to happen. Like, even the Texans thing is like, okay, they're in a different order than I would rank them for sure. I waxed poetic about Tank Dell. I love Tank Dell, but like they kind of all go within 15 picks, right? It's like the market's confident, but they're not like that confident between the 3 of them. The Packers thing is like, no, one guy goes in the 5th or 6th round, one guy goes in the 7th round, another guy goes in the 12th, and another guy goes in the last round. And Dobbs goes ahead of Wicks, actually. So another guy goes in the 10th or whatever. It's like, no, they're very confident. They're very, very confident in how this thing is going to shake out. And not only do I just generally disagree, like you said, if I'm making a prediction, I would disagree. But I also think even if I didn't disagree, the math on the probability of that order doesn't. The math is not mathing on like how probable that is.
I mean, it could be Wicks 1, Melton 2, especially if there's 2 injuries. Right, especially to Reed and Watson, we could be looking up, and it's Wicks at 1, Melton at 2. But in general, without any injuries, it could just be that Melton and Wicks are straight up better than Watson and better than Dobbs, and that's that 3 receiver set that we talked about. And we know that Jordan Love is at least better than Aaron Rodgers, which is funny now. It's great. It's cool.
Yeah.
Did you know, by the way, that Aaron Rodgers was doing his own rookie analysis? He had a whole grading book where he was analyzing all these rookie receivers. And Eric, funniest thing happened. The funniest thing happened. He was grading the receivers. Aaron Rodgers was. And for probably a draft guide, we have a draft guide. Our draft guide's updated post-draft on playerprofiler.com. Theo Greminger, incredible job. He's the sort of editor-in-chief of that. And our whole team contributed. But Aaron has his own. And he actually graded Malachi Corley as the number 1 receiver in the draft. So
doesn't this reminds me of Michael Jordan retires from the NBA and he becomes part owner and GM of the Charlotte Hornets, for any of my basketball fans out there. And spoiler, didn't go well. Didn't go great for the Charlotte Hornets. I'm not sure if anybody's followed their record over the course of the last 2 decades, but not a lot of wins out there in Charlotte. And as great of a football player as Aaron Rodgers is, a lot of guys who are great at the game are not the best talent evaluators. And Aaron's had a few other things on his mind, by the way, over the course of the last couple of years that I find it hard to believe he's really grinding the tape on Western Kentucky football.
More like Western civilization.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't know that they have, the all 22 film in his yurt or whatever that he is out there.
He reads many leather-bound books.
Yeah, right. While he's applying the clay to his, to recover from his Achilles tear. But in all seriousness, I am a fan of Malachi Corley, but in a way that is kind of unique to best ball, like we were talking about with some of those other guys. I think Malachi Corley presents a case alongside Aaron Rodgers, who is a very selfish quarterback, is kind of how I would put the way that he plays quarterback. He's not interested in throwing interceptions. He's not interested in taking risks with the football. He's not interested in getting hit or taking sacks.
He's not interested in playing fast.
He's not interested in playing fast. So he's going to come up to the line, right? The ball's probably going to come out quick. He's not going to throw into coverage. And he's going to diagnose the defense. He's going to get the ball into the hands of skillful players. And I do think Malachi Corley presents a skill set that's really unique in that way, and was used that way at Western Kentucky. Frankly, I think he's a flawed wide receiver, but he has certain skills that can apply really well to that. And maybe that's what Aaron's seeing, right? If I can come up and just check to something, get the ball into the hands of Corley and let him do the damage after the catch, I think that would actually fit. And so I'm definitely drafting Malachi Corley, although he would not be, you mentioned the system thing, the Nico Collins system thing. Malachi Corley, you couldn't just drop Malachi Corley into every situation and I would be interested in him. But I do think this is one that I have interest in him, especially in best ball, where I can just deal with a couple of screen pass touchdowns from Aaron Rodgers in a given week, and I'm good. I don't have to decide to start him.
Well, I think we know Garrett Wilson is going to blot out the sun with fantasy points.
Yep.
Breece Hall is going to blot out the sun. There's just not a lot of room beyond those guys for a lower volume offense.
Yep.
That's my problem with Malachi Corley. And if I'm going to take an auxiliary asset in one of these types of offenses, it's going to be like if there's a value tight end, right? So that's why Conklin's interesting. Typically, I'm going to go that guy over, trying to take a shot on the backup running back, because if there's a backup running back that we care about in New York, we're already fucked. We've lost Breece Hall.
Right.
Okay? And whatever happens, he's not Breece Hall. Breece Hall can overcome a slow offense with a rebuilding offensive line. Okay? Whatever running back is going to get touches behind Breece Hall, if something happens to Breece Hall, is going to be in a situation they're not going to be teed up to score fantasy points. So I don't care much about that backfield beyond Breece Hall. Don't care much for the passing game beyond Garrett Wilson, except for Tyler Conklin. And that's just like the mechanics of how offenses run and how fantasy points are scored, pretty much. Now, like in Denver, it's hard to get excited if they had to pick a team that I'm like, I don't want anyone here. Like, this is, hey, Jalil McLaughlin, he's fun, he's gadgety. Okay, that's cool. He can break off long runs on his own. That's helpful, actually, when you're on a team that's going to be grinding it out and getting their coach fired, and he'll be, leaving the NFL kicking and screaming and taking another job with whether it's Fox or CBS or whoever. Right?
He's going to coach the Houston Roughnecks in a couple of years or something.
It's all destined to happen. He'll be one of the finally. He's the last of a breed of coaches that they're exiting the league. So Denver's interesting in that even Cortland Sutton's not showing up to camp. It's just like you couldn't even draw up a picture of a team that has fewer assets that you would want to invest in Denver. But then we hear that, there's a particular receiver who's agitating for a trade. And we're in the chat right now on YouTube, and people are talking about Treylon Burks. And it's funny when a team, jumps up and gets a play, and you hate it so much. You're like, I had 17 teams in mind for Treylon Burks. And then he signs with Denver. Fuck you. So a two-part question there. Do you see anything in Denver that you like, and or where do you think Treylon Burks should go, if he goes?
I got to think about the second one, but I do definitely have the first one. It's funny you say this because I was totally trolling, but I posted this on Twitter the other day that Sean Payton is assembling like his dollar store version of one of the old Saints offenses, right? Like, and I comped it to the 2017 Saints, which was Alvin Kamara's, I believe, rookie season. And I spurred this because, so giving away a little bit of the ending, he started comping Blake Watson to Alvin Kamara in a press conference the other day. And I kind of liked Blake Watson at Memphis as a prospect, like not anything super crazy. But again, I love the guys that are like multidimensional, good in the pass game and those kinds of things. He was hyper productive at Memphis, but also like everybody who plays for Memphis is always like we keep doing the Memphis running back thing. It's like fetch, right? Like we got to stop trying to make Memphis running backs happen because they're just apparently never going to happen. Like even Tony Pollard, once he got a full-time job, it was like, no, not still can't even do it with Tony Pollard. But the Broncos are an interesting situation, again, specific to best ball where I live. I don't know that I'll ever draft a Bronco in a managed league this year. I don't know how much interest I have, even from a dynasty perspective, in the Broncos. But in best ball, there's an interesting application for these teams that we all agree are going to stink. Like that's the assessment of absolutely everyone. We look at this roster, we look at Sean Payton, and we say there ain't no way that they're scoring any points this season. And yet, this happened. I got a lot of weird references, I promise. It happens every year, right? So let's just look at the last couple of years where we've done this. Tom Brady leaves the Bucs, and we say, oh my God, no Brady, Baker Mayfield. Like Baker Mayfield, really? Like nobody was that excited for Rashod White. Sure, they had Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, but it's like, nope, the Bucs are going to stink. We can't draft the Bucs. And then the Bucs were a lot better than we thought that they were. Russell Wilson leaves Seattle. Funny enough, Russell Wilson goes to Denver, and we get excited for Denver. Russ leaves Seattle. We're like, no, Geno, absolutely not. These guys are going to stink. This offense is going to stink. Geno outperforms, and the offense is a lot better.
This is a very good point you're making.
The Houston Texans, just the last one, last year. Some people like Stroud, but nobody thought Stroud was this, right? We look back last year, and the Stroud takes were not, oh my God, he's the best rookie quarterback of all time. It was, is he better than Bryce, right? Is he better than Richardson type situation? And we like Nico, whatever, Tank, whatever. Nobody was that excited. And now fast forward, and we just talked all three Texans wide receivers are going in the first 3 rounds, and CJ Stroud goes in the 5th round, and Joe Mixon goes in the 5th round. And so we're wrong so often about exactly how good offenses are, and we get very overconfident in their prices. specifically for best ball that I'm interested in investing in these guys. I think Troy Franklin was a fun prospect, albeit flawed also himself. I think Marvin Mims was a fun prospect, albeit flawed himself. And I think they have like 5 running backs that could emerge into something. If Bo Nix is not awful, which I'm not sure that he is anything better than awful. If he's not awful, and they can, turn this into a functional offense, I think you could have Audric Estime as the old Mark Ingram or the old Chris Ivory or the old Latavius Murray in this offense. It could be Javonte too, but you could have McLaughlin or Blake Watson or something like that being, a dollar store Alvin Kamara type, a Darren Sproles in this offense. I think that there's some juice to squeeze out of here.
You're saying, yes, you're saying if it's deep, and we are well into the draft. We're round 15, round 17. You have one more running back. Estime and McLaughlin are options.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And Dulcich,
that's where we are,
Dulcich is your Kobe Fleener. Dulcich is your Kobe Fleener. Your last round, oh no, I need a second. I need another tight end. It's wide open, and he was not a terrible prospect, so I'll take that shot that he's healthy and he's the guy.
Right. So that was the other guy. Dulcich, again, not a lot, of offensive meat on the bone. So where do you go? Fringe tight end that could be something. Mm-hmm. Right? Even Troutman could be something. I know he hasn't shown anything for 3 years, but it's possible. Dulcich has more upside for best ball for sure. And that's where it is. And that's where it ends. And I find it funny that there's now the Treylon Burks rumor mill is ramping up. Where's he going to go? Is he going to go? Will he get traded? And then there's these obvious landing spots like Los Angeles and Buffalo. And I've seen this so many times, and we're going to look up and it's going to be Denver. And you all are going to be so miserable. And no matter where he goes, also, spoiler alert, it's not going to matter. Okay? So he's not going to be anything anyway. So Treylon Burks is a bust. And, you can just sort of write that down. And then we can move on,
You know where it would be nice to see, though, to put the Treylon Burks truthers versus the hey, have you watched him play for the last couple of years debate to the test. I need to double check, so this could be not feasible salary wise, cap wise, but who did not add anything to their offense and certainly not to their passing game. They actually lost a player, and they have an elite offense. Dallas Cowboys are playing right now. It looks to be Jalen Tolbert as the third wide receiver, and then some disgusting group behind him of Cavante Turpin and Ryan Flournoy. And
interesting, though. You have some Tolbert. I know you do.
I have some Tolbert, and I have some Ryan Flournoy. Shout out to SEMO, Southeast Missouri State prospect. But I'm just interested in that situation. I don't I mean, Jalen Tolbert got on the field and did absolutely nothing last year after he started to steal work from Michael Gallup. And I don't think that there's much talent in any of these guys in that third spot, but it's the Dallas Cowboys, and they have an elite offense. And there's, other than CD, there's still a lot of juice to squeeze out of this offense. And I want to take shots on that. And so, like, if you were to get somebody, they could be waiting for somebody to get cut. The Dallas Cowboys, I'm not saying Burks will get cut, but someone like that could be interesting in Dallas.
Where did Treylon Burks go to college?
Oh my God, Arkansas.
Where did Jerry Jones go to college?
Oh wow, I have not put this one together. I did not think about that one. I like this. Is that good or bad? Sometimes we have inherent bias, though, right? Like, we watch that team, and maybe does Jerry actually think he's good or not?
No, Jerry wanted him in the draft.
Oh, he did.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, famously. Yeah, he got overruled.
Who did they take in that draft?
I think they took Parsons.
Oh yeah, good thing he got overruled.
I mean, right? But so I there's been a lot of drafts classes. I could be wrong, but I think it was something like that. He's been overruled on offensive players. Most famously with Johnny Manziel. Thank God.
Oh, they took Tyler Smith. So
Tyler Smith. Okay, but anyway, it's interesting, right? That's an interesting call. So that's the answer. So chat, you have your answer. An hour later, since the question was asked, the answer is Dallas Cowboys. That's where we think that Treylon Burks could and should go. I have Washington, Tampa, and Las Vegas as the best sources of ADP value. And I think actually I would even amendments now that we've fully broken down the wide receiver core in Green Bay. I think it's got to be Green Bay. Got to add Green Bay, bump Vegas off this list. Give us another one. Give us another team where you're thinking, man, every up and down this roster, man, I want these guys.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love those three. Those are really, really good ones. I think Vegas is probably at the top of my list, and I would not have said that not that long ago. Like if you would have said in 2024, who's your highest exposure team going to be, like the team you've drafted the most players from, I don't know if the Raiders were on my bingo card, but they're way up there for me.
They better be.
I totally agree with that sentiment, and I'm going to add another cheap offense, and this is why.
No, it has to be cheap. That's because it's an ADP, you know.
Yeah, the New England Patriots, and here's why. I don't especially love really any of these individual players, but something that is just super high priority to me for my skill players when I have an uncertain situation. Why the Broncos don't fit this is because there is absolutely no floor of competent quarterback play for the Denver Broncos, right? If Bo Nix stinks, Jarrett Stidham is not, I believe he's still the backup, is not saving the day for the Denver Broncos. What the Patriots have is you have a situation where either Drake May is good, and that's elevating all those skill players that are around him, right? They've been yearning for someone better than Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi to come in and help these guys.
Oh, actually, I have better news for you than you even thought.
Go on.
Do you know who the number 2 quarterback is currently on the Denver Broncos depth chart for now? Probably not when the season starts.
Oh, no, not Zach Wilson.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Even worse.
Yeah, no, it's good news. It's good news for your take. Good take news there.
Yeah. We saw what happens when your floor of quarterback play is Zach Wilson,
right,
and Tim Boyle and stuff like that. The whole offense craters. In New England, you either have Drake May is good enough to be, a competent NFL starter, or who knows, maybe much better, or he stinks and he's the new Zach Wilson. Jacoby Brissett is the floor, right? And we know what we're getting with Jacoby Brissett. We saw it in Washington. We've seen it in Indy. We've seen it in New England before. We've seen Jacoby Brissett be a good enough quarterback to elevate or at least stabilize an offensive situation. So you have a cheap Ramondre Stevenson. You have a cheap Antonio Gibson in a clear, backfield situation. It's not very murky there. You have a cheap, to your tight end point, Hunter Henry just is going to be free to us in drafts for all of eternity. Apparently every year it's just like, oh, Hunter Henry's here at pick 180. That seems good. But now we have an influx of wide receiver talent with Jalen Polk and Javon Baker, where we don't have to draft Devontae Parker. We don't have to draft Tyquan Thornton. We have new blood with some talented rookies in there that I can mix in at super cheap prices. And like I said, that floor of quarterback play is so important for all those skill guys. You don't have to draft Drake May. You definitely don't have to draft Jacoby Brissett. But the fact that they have that level of floor, and then you do have a ceiling with May, albeit a low floor, but a ceiling with May, if he's actually good, that can really elevate this offense with some new talent around him.
And the guy that was productive last year, who has a little bit of juice, who's exciting, is DeMario Douglas, and you don't have to pay for him either.
Yep, exactly. The whole offense is same thing. Other than Ramondre, nobody goes in the top 150.
Yeah, this is an interesting best ball versus managed league team, in that the guys you would actually want in managed leagues, depending on how deep, you would want Antonio Gibson, right? You want Antonio Gibson in all formats.
Yes.
In a 14-teamer, 16-teamer, deep seasonal league, even a guy like a Kevin Harris is interesting, right? Because Kevin Harris is a good football player. Kevin Harris could just be the best, option behind Ramondre Stevenson and be the guy they turn to and mix in short yardage and just be, a productive player when and if called upon, you look up and it's like, oh, it's going to be the Antonio Gibson show. No, it's not. It's 60-40 Harris.
Yeah.
That's very possible, right?
Definitely.
That's very possible. So those two guys are interesting, a little more interesting in managed leagues. But then the wide receivers in best ball, you would never draft any of these guys in managed leagues. You wouldn't even bother. You're not going to start these guys. You don't want these guys. But hell, I definitely want Demario Douglas. I definitely want Jalen Polk. I definitely want Javon Baker. I'll even take some Juju Smith-Schuster. I'll even take some KJ Osborne. Who cares? The whole thing's wide open. Wide open. This is going to be I'm not going to go out to Jalen Reagor, but there's 6 guys here that could give you spike weeks. And we just don't know who they're going to be. We don't know how the chips are going to fall. We don't even know who's going to make the team.
Right.
That's the beauty of it. Fun fact, in the 2016 draft, the top 2 tight ends drafted are both on the Patriots now.
Who's the second?
Austin Hooper.
Oh, God, yeah. Austin Hooper.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
Still alive and kicking. Good for him.
We're going to go into rapid fire mode. I have a number of burning questions, exactly 10. 10 burning questions for Erik Beimfohr. You'll know how this works, so we're going to get into it after this. This episode is made possible by Underdog Fantasy, and Underdog Fantasy is the leader in best ball. When you go to join an Underdog Fantasy best ball draft, it fills very quickly, especially now. It's Best Ball Mania season, baby! Best Ball Mania 5! I can't believe they're at Best Ball Mania 5 already. $15 million in prizes. They're giving out $15 million with $1.5 million to first. Playing in best ball leagues makes you better. It helps train you on player value and strategy. And Underdog offers a lot more than just best ball contests. They offer pick'ems. My new favorite, the golf pick'ems. But they have the NBA pick'ems, baseball pick'ems going on throughout the offseason. Hit the pick'ems, back to best ball, hit the pick'ems. So use promo code Underworld. Promo code Underworld gets you a 50% deposit bonus up to $250. So they've increased the maximum deposit bonus. It was $100. Now it's up to $125. When you get the Underdog app, use promo code Underworld and go draft your ass off. 10 burning questions. 10 burning questions from a man, Erik Beimfohr. Talk about your mistakes last year. You must have made some mistakes last year, year before. Maybe a big one you've learned from, and you keep going back to it and be like, man, I'm so glad I learned that lesson.
Overconfidence in just about anything, specific
right.
to a team or a player take. I think it's okay to take, and I will take very big stands on individual players, but it shouldn't be because I know better. It shouldn't necessarily be because I know better. It's because I've assessed kind of all the pros, all the cons, and the market. We talk so much about ADP on this show. That should be driving where you're taking your biggest stands, the things that you can take advantage of against the market, not necessarily always that I know better about each player.
And I'm drafting some Nico Collins, much to my chagrin, for that
Bingo.
reason.
I don't like Diggs, and I don't like the Diggs price. I love Tank Dell, but I'm drafting some Stephon Diggs to that exact point.
You got to do it. What's your most common roster build this year, and how much zero RB are you doing?
That's the easiest question you could have possibly asked me. Zero RB is definitely my most common one. And as of right now, other than when I slip up and, accidentally I'm walking the dogs and miss my pick, my plan is to only draft zero running back teams for the foreseeable future. I'm always keeping a caveat open that I could pivot, but I really genuinely think this strategy, this is like the golden year of zero running back, and I'm trying to do it in basically every draft.
You're not worried about Bijan or Breece Hall burning you?
Oh, I'm worried. I'm definitely worried, but it's so I know we're doing burning questions, but I'm on this Moneyball kick, the movie, the Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill movie. And when
excuse me. Excuse me. It's fake. I say it's rapid fire. We take as long as we want.
Okay, so
It's a contrivance.
This is a semi-automatic version of rapid fire, not fully automatic.
It's not rapid fire up, but we say it.
Yeah.
Wait, we even have. Wait, no, actually, what am I? We need to make sure we could even go a step further and play a sound effect just to drive home how serious we are about rapid fire.
That's the separate end. Oh God.
That happened.
Now I don't even remember what I was going to say. Oh,
super fast.
Yes. So on the zero running back thing, there's a scene in Moneyball where they're trying to do their Moneyball thing, but the manager won't play the guys that they want to play. And Carlos Pena is in the lineup every single day, and they keep wanting them to bench him. And so Brad Pitt, Billy Beane says, like we should trade him. Like we should trade, away Pena so we can. That's the only way to get the manager to do what we want to do is we got to trade the players that we don't think he should play. And Jonah Hill, the assistant, is like, Billy, he's an all-star. Like he made the all-star game. Like we can't just trade him away, right? And Billy, looks to him and he said, "Do you believe in this fucking thing or not? Like, do you believe in what we're doing or not?" And so that has really stuck with me. And to your very first question about like things that you've learned from, I feel like I've been able to identify a bunch of different edges in the best ball game, largely structural, but also sometimes individual player or team specific. But I haven't always like actually exploited them to the best of my ability. I haven't like fully acted on my belief on them. And I genuinely believe that the way the market is set up and everything and the way the game is played out with how much late season is so impactful and how great that can be for cheaper running backs, like we've talked about on the show, that I want to stick to it. And if I lose, look, we get to play again next year. We get to play again for the playoffs. I get to play DFS every single week. That's okay. But I want to be more confident in the things that I think are the strongest edges.
The beauty is you don't want the running backs in round 2, 3, 4 anyway. It's just the first round running backs.
It's only those. It's the big three. It's the big three.
It's just the big three that you're worried about. And guess what? Well, Amon-Ra's going to score close to the same number of fantasy points no matter what. Anyway, so in that format, especially, come on. So now, what are the first round wide receivers that you're drafting most and least? Because we know you're not drafting the running backs.
Yeah, I'm not drafting the running backs. Least is going to be A.J. Brown. Not like anything really. These are all superstars, right? They're first round picks. I just think that A.J. Brown is not really quite on the level from a fantasy aspect as the very top guys. And then I can tell myself the story that Puka Nacua and Garrett Wilson are like these emerging young superstars, and not just tell the story. It's probably likely Garrett Wilson getting Aaron Rodgers now. Puka Nacua, right? Cooper Kupp is maybe aging out, and maybe it becomes Cooper Kupp's team. AJ Brown is more of 1A, 1B with Devonta Smith, and he's great. But just in terms of prioritizing those wide receivers, he comes last out of those first round guys for me. And then I do actually have CeeDee Lamb ranked as my 101. Naturally, you'd expect the zero running back bro doesn't have Christian McCaffrey 101. I have CeeDee Lamb 101, so I get him a little more frequently than other. So
you probably have a lot of Lamb, but maybe because of where Wilson's ADP is, it might be close between Lamb and Wilson.
Right, exactly. So I take Garrett Wilson over AJ Brown, and then I take CeeDee Lamb over Christian McCaffrey. So, but I can only get CeeDee, at the 101 or the 102 usually, whereas Wilson you can get him. Since I'm not taking the running backs, I can get a little more Garrett Wilson.
What ADP move has surprised you the most this year? Where just like the market is
I was just
doing something that you believe to be irrational, and you're just like, this one's this one really took me by surprise. It could be in a good way or a bad way. You could create a value or create a guy that you're just like, whoa, I'm out on that guy. Jeez, what the hell?
It's a tight end position. I think the market has gotten lazy with the elite tight end pricing. Specific on Underdog, it's a huge, thing across the whole industry. The wide receivers have gotten really, really, really expensive, which I think is efficient. I think is the right way for the things to be priced. Right. And running backs have gotten cheaper, but actually elite tight ends have also gotten cheaper. And that, again, the math is not mathing to me. That, like, if we're going to price down running backs, and I think this year in particular at tight end, like, we don't have Sam Laporta. We don't have Dalton. Like, we have Brock Bowers, who of course I like, but, like, no offense to Ben Sinnott, who I like fine, but, like, Ben Sinnott and Jatavian Sanders are not Sam Laporta. They're not Michael Mayer. They're not. We don't have as much juice to squeeze out of later round tight ends, right? There is no semi-intriguing young tight end stepping into the Dallas Cowboys starting job like Jake Ferguson. There are none of those. So the later round guys are not as appealing to me.
Yeah, the guys in the later rounds are on these offenses we don't love. They're like the Dulciches. They're the Conklins. They're the Hunter Henrys.
So to me, that makes the elite guys even more valuable. And we already knew how valuable they were, just like, especially in best ball, but even in managed, just to have an elite tight end you can start every week, and you don't have to, like, you don't care about matchup. You don't care, right? I'm starting Sam Laporta. I'm starting Mark Andrews. Nothing else matters. And they also bring the greatest floor, and they bring the greatest ceiling to win you a week, which of course we know is huge in best ball. And yet they're getting cheaper. And I don't think that makes any sense at all. So elite tight ends are similar to zero running back. I would say elite tight ends are maybe the second, biggest pillar of my draft strategy this year.
Where are you starting to draft running backs? Is that where the RB dead zone is?
I would say generally round 7, round 8, which is another.
So you're even post dead zone.
Yeah. So
you're really okay. This is traditional zero RB. This is like zero RB from like 2014.
Yeah, real hardcore zero RB, bro. But Matt, the thing is, like, you look at the 7th and the 8th round now. This is not old school 7th and 8th round running backs that you're getting in there. This is why I believe, like, more so than the early stuff, why I believe in this so much this year is, like, dude, you get to the 7th round and Aaron Jones is available. You get to the 7th round and Alvin Kamara is available. You think the Bengals offense is going to be good? Like, the rest of us, you can have the Bengals running backs past pick 100. You can have both Steelers guys cheap, right? You can have Jonathan Brooks. You can have Trey Benson. You can have Ramondre Stevenson. All of these guys are available to you from the 7th round and later. And that's never been the case before. So I'm trying to take advantage of all of that, as well as the new elite wide receiver pricing, and then a little bit cheaper elite tight end. I can kind of have the best of both worlds with this new running back price.
Do you consider Pitts and Kittle elite tight ends?
Kittle, yes. Pitts, sort of, not really. Kittle would probably be the guy, I think, that is the cutoff. And then there's like the semi-elites, which would be like your Ingrams and your Fergusons and Njokus, who, like, could be elite at any given one week, but they're not necessarily like the locked-in elites. George Kittle might be the most underappreciated best ball asset, specifically that there is.
That's on the show sheet. That's on the show sheet.
I wrote about him in the 5 Things piece as well, where he keeps getting cheaper and cheaper, and I think he should be getting more expensive based on what he's doing. Look at
Ayuk's ADP, for Christ's sake.
Debo and Ayuk go crazy high, but it's because George Kittle, I think people get frustrated with the low weeks, because you got to suffer through 3 and 4 point games to get the 25s.
So
but
you're
again, in best
3
ball,
tight ends when you go Kittle?
No, not necessarily, but I am making sure, like, I'm not doing anything too low floor with my second guy. So I will, like, I'll do, Jake Ferguson and George Kittle. I like some double kind of elite-ish type, toss Ingram onto there, toss, whoever your favorite flavor is of that
Kittle
second tight
is
end.
Nice.
Because Ingram has a really high target week to week, like, target share
floor.
Perfect.
So you get the Ingram,
I like
the
that.
steady Eddie. You get, so you break it down, you're talking about 12 Ingram weeks and like 6, 7 Kittle weeks.
Yep.
Right?
100%. Kittle had.
There you go. Even if you got 5 Kittle weeks, right, and 12 Ingram, that's probably good. That's great.
100%. The big weeks are what win things for you. You do want to find a way to get George Kittle to the playoffs, which is why the Ingram, steady floor is helpful.
But because some of those weeks, Ingram will also be great, but then just barely outscore Kittle.
Exactly. And George, so last year, I think people are viewing last year as like a bad year for George Kittle. And like, if you're playing like total cumulative scoring or something, maybe it's a little bit different. But we have a metric we call nuclear weeks, which is, spike weeks. It's even greater than like a spike week, basically meaning like this guy kind of won you the week at that position.
When you name your app Spike Week, you need to come up with a name that's bigger than Spike Week.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That can't be the
nuclear
that can't
week,
be the
of course.
Yeah. So we came up with nuclear week. There were 3 tight ends who had 4 nuclear weeks last year. Travis Kelce, Sam Laporta, and George Kittle. And I feel like George Kittle is like being left behind there because, of course, he does have some low floor games. But if I can,
I hate his matchup in Week 17, Eric.
Yeah, and the old Lions matchup, I think will be just fine for George Kittle. Yeah, everything just screams an awesome best ball pick, but I think people get caught up in like the frustration of the low scoring weeks.
So that's my answer to a question I asked you earlier, which was the George Kittle ADP. That surprised me. I was like, because you think about what would this guy's ADP be, and we talked about. I was surprised by Kyron's ADP. I was surprised by Nico's opening ADP, and Kittle's ADP has gone up, especially after the schedule came out. But even so, I was like, wait a second, what are we talking? Isn't this best ball? Last time I checked, I don't give a shit that he had some 2-point weeks. What are we talking about here?
On DraftKings, the folks listening to this, if you agree with us on George Kittle, hop in a couple DraftKings drafts this summer. I promise you will love it. I've gotten George Kittle in the 80s on DraftKings.
Fucking ha, man. All right, so we talk about wide receiver so important. We've mentioned some of these Patriots wide receivers. Let's give us a couple more late round wide receivers for best ball.
Ooh, that's a tricky one.
How is that?
This
tricky?
one is well, no, I just mean like I'm trying to come through with my deep cuts. You know what I mean?
Oh,
me.
Right.
We got to go through the deep. We got to go through the album with all the deep cuts on it. One of my favorite prospects in this class, and I think people are burying him because they signed Odell Beckham, is Malik Washington from Virginia by way of Northwestern. Just an absolute monster. His final season similar to how Tutu was the offense. Now, different archetypes of players, but similar to how Tutu was the entire Louisville offense, his final season, Malik Washington was the entire Virginia offense, led the entire NCAA in YAC. So he is a natural slot receiver, and he is more of a yards after the catch type guy. But I can think of a pretty decent offense to have that skill set, and that being a Miami Dolphins Tua Tagovailoa with Tyreek and Jalen Waddle drawing coverage on the outside. That feels pretty good to me. Aren't you worried about Odell Beckham? Sure, I guess. But if he can't outplay Odell Beckham, it didn't matter. It didn't matter anyway. I think he fits really well in the slot.
Roman Wilson?
Roman Wilson might be my highest drafted wide receiver as of right now. I think it's Tank and then Roman Wilson. I'm very
Your two highest drafted are Tank and Roman Wilson?
I don't have it in front of me.
Oh
but I'm
my
pretty
God,
sure
that's amazing! That's great. Wow. But thank you.
You get talked about a floor of quarterback play. I don't trust Arthur Smith as far as I can throw him, and he's a little bigger than me, so I can't throw him that far. But like, you have either the best of Russell Wilson and Justin Fields at quarterback, which is better than a lot of other situations in the NFL. I'm a big George Pickens fan, but George Pickens ain't exactly Justin Jefferson in terms of drawing all the targets in this offense. And there's no competition, like absolutely zero. It's just Arthur Smith's old, vagabonds that he brought back over from Atlanta. And Roman Wilson, I also think, is a really good fit in there schematically.
Oh yeah,
a really good fit in Pittsburgh, and he goes at pick like 160, despite great draft capital.
He's
really
gone
fun
up
profile.
a little bit. He's at 155 now, but yes, very. Yeah, he's. He's. I think some people are starting to figure it out. But I'm sure like you could get him in the final round on DraftKings. It's like
Yeah,
one of those things.
Tank and then Roman Wilson are my two highest drafted.
Give us one more late round receiver you like.
I mentioned Javon Baker, or we mentioned Javon Baker already. So I'm going to toss out another open situation. We talked about the Cowboys with like Tolbert and there being, like he's interesting. I also want to throw the Saints in there. If you prefer A.T. Perry, I do have A.T. Perry higher up on this list, but they did also draft Bub Means. And those are just the kind of situations I really like.
A.T. Perry is the perfect one.
Yeah, A.T. Perry, I think I liked him last year actually a little bit. He was an interesting prospect. Again, flawed a little bit, but Wake Forest runs a really weird scheme that makes it a little bit difficult sometimes to. It's kind of like Gabe Davis at UCF, right? They run this. He's just running go routes all the time, so it's tough to figure out exactly how good they are. I think A.T. Perry, with a second, another year under his belt, and it's just like him and Bub Means, man. Like and Rashid Shaheed isn't exactly going to like dominate targets alongside Olave. I think there's a lot in New Orleans, and A.T. Perry would be my favorite guy.
Well, my favorite thing to do is to find the number twos that aren't real number twos.
Yeah.
So what you do is you go find number twos that aren't real number twos, and then who's the number 3, number 4, right? And that's what you're doing.
Yep.
Rashid Shaheed's cool. Right? But he's not a real number 2. It's like last year with Puka. Is Tutu Atwell a real number 2? No. Right? He was just the guy that got the targets at the end of the year and whatever. They drafted a guy in day 3 and we'll see what happens and how it shakes out. But at the start of the year, on the depth chart, right? So, what is he in and of himself? First principles. Rashid Shaheed is a field stretcher. He's a very good football player. But he's not a traditional number 2. And there's a bunch of those guys you can go down the list, and then that's how you then, you follow the path to an A.T. Perry or even a Bub Means. So this is why at ADP, I'd be more interested in a Bud Means than a, let's say, Malachi Corley, right? Because Mike Williams is Mike Williams. Right? Mike Williams isn't a fake number 2. Mike Williams is a perfect complement. Perfect for Garrett Wilson. Right? And then, we're hoping that maybe like some, he's also been injured a lot. So there's possibilities. There's multiple outs for Malachi Corley. He's interesting. But man, it's a little more interesting when you go to a team where there's not a Mike Williams there. Then, it's not just an injury outcome that you're looking for. It's actually that the way the season plays out, this guy's just playing great. That A.T. Perry's just their second best pure receiver. And that's just what he is.
I love your concept about the not real number 2s. You can sort of apply that to the number 1 as well. I love Chris Olave. He's a really good, really good football player. I'm drafting him as well. Chris Olave ain't peak Devontae Adams. Chris Olave is not Justin Jefferson, right? Chris Olave is not Tyreek Hill. He's a very good football player, but it's like this trickle down effect from Chris Olave is more like a 1B/2, like on an elite off. Like if he was on an elite offense, you would have like Tyreek and Chris Olave, and then he would be incredible. But so you almost have everybody is trying to punch above their weight at every single spot. So who are the guys currently slotted at 3 and 4? Because they have the most to gain right out of that situation.
That's right. So who's your top truther guy, the guy you have stashed in Dynasty you're not giving up on?
We said Kendre and Evan Hull for sure are the two are two at the top of my list.
Like Bateman's mine.
Ooh, yeah.
A guy like that, maybe even a guy a little older, and you're just like, he's still here. He's not going anywhere. He's still technically on the roster. He's still commanding targets. He could be something.
Oh man, I did not prep one for this one. I'm trying to scroll super quickly. So this is, I don't actually really believe this, but who's on my longest running Dynasty league, strictly because this guy was like part of my brand when I came into the best ball space, and shout out to him.
Tell me.
Darrington Evans was a guy who was like, when I first really started creating like season long and best ball content, he was a 3rd round pick out of Appalachian State, backing up Derrick Henry, and also like kind of the passing down back for Derrick Henry. So I'm holding on to him because we're going to keep Darrington until he's like no longer on my fantasy league or whatever.
No, it's a fun player. A guy that I think people like that, a good guy like that, but not necessarily like that, who's down the depth chart we've talked about, a backfield we've talked about, is Trey Sermon. Because there are people that really were bullish on Trey Sermon. They loved that he was drafted by Shanahan. And he pounded the table famously. Remember, he pounded the table. He pounded the table, Eric, for Trey Sermon. Now Trey Sermon is in a great spot. And the thing is, Evan Hull is simply better than Goodson. Goodson struggles in a lot of different areas. I think Goodson is more like probably a better special teams player than anything else. Struggles with some of these fundamental things we talked about, the pass blocking, where something happens to Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor picks up an injury. We believe it's going to be a great news for Evan Hull, right? Great news for Evan. And Evan Hull is certainly going to he's going to double his touches. But Sermon's going to get touches too.
Agreed.
Sermon's going to get in there. So that would be a guy where I could see people, because he was, second, third round pick, went to the 49ers, very bullish on him, and then thought maybe he could be something with the Eagles. And it's like, man, I'm now officially a Trey Sermon truther. He's resurfaced on a team that shed Zach Moss. For all the reasons you like Evan Hull, we talk about this all the time. Yeah, you like A.T. Perry, but also Bub Means becomes interesting. For all the same reasons you like this guy, you need to also pay attention to this guy. And that's what's cool about deep dynasty and best ball is you have to go down the board. You actually have to know these guys. I think that's really fun. Give us a bold prediction for 2024. Go ahead.
Can I just toss one? Sorry. I was looking while you're Chris Rodriguez in Washington.
Yeah.
I think he can play. I feel reasonably confident he can play. And I think it was like the Trey Sermon thing. If something happens to Brian Robinson, Austin Eckler's not taking over the whole backfield. Not at this age, never has, never probably will ever again. And Eckler may just be done. I think if something happens to B-Rob, I think Chris Rodriguez, like we could be looking back, and we're in week 13 and Chris Rodriguez is the highest owned running back on a DFS slate or something because Brian Robinson's out and he does not get drafted in any of these drafts.
Love that. Okay. Hit us with a bold prediction and you're out.
Bold prediction is 0 running back wins every single format of fantasy this year. Main event on FFPC, Best Ball Mania, DraftKings Millie, or whatever. This group of running backs from the 7th round on is the greatest thing we've ever seen, and you can't get the wide receiver firepower without spending up. You need to draft 0 running back teams because they're going to be by far the most supercharged versions that you can get. You want all these guys that we talk, basically everybody we talked about here today, and everyone that we've also hated on here today fits that 0 running back structure. So there's tons of different options and ways to build through that structure, and the market is just handing you absolutely loaded teams without even really trying.
From the Podfather to you, I deeply appreciate you tuning in. And many ask, what can I do? What can I do to help support the host, the research they do, the production costs? Go to playerprofiler.com, Dynasty Deluxe, World Famous Draft Kit, Rankings, DFS Dominator, and of course, data analysis. Subscribe to any one of those, and you support all of us and take Player Profiler to the moon.